I found myself sitting on the deck. Watching past my dangling feet, I saw the small waves lap onto the barnacle and algae-littered beams. I lifted my head to look onto the all-too-familiar sight, filling me with calm and ease as I watched the pink and orange sunset slowly fade behind the horizon of the glittering sea. I sat there wondering and pondering to myself different thoughts of personal intrigue when I noticed that it was getting very dark out and I could see the moon start to rise higher and higher into the sky. I thought to myself, I should probably get back to my car and go home. As I went to stand up, I felt something grab a hold of my ankles. I looked down and saw two large tentacle-like things coil their way around my lower legs, and I felt a jerk as my head slammed into the wooden deck below me. My head started swimming with thoughts of confusion and trying to fight for my life. My hands and arms flailed about, just trying to grab onto something, but to no avail. Soon I plunged into the dark waters of the Atlantic Ocean, and with every inch and every pull of me getting dragged deeper and deeper into the depths, I tried fighting it, but soon my vision began to pinhole. I felt numb and cold, and all of a sudden, bleakness. I awoke to a burning sensation in my lungs, immediately sitting up and violently coughing, expelling seawater that had been trapped in my lungs. I heard the echo crash to and fro off the walls. I started fumbling in my pockets for my flashlight when all of a sudden a wall of putrid decay permeated my nostrils. I curiously wondered, where was I? What just happened? I ended up finding my flashlight, and after pulling it out and clicking it on, just a pale, dim yellow light started shining around the area around me. After a few good whacks, it began getting more and more bright, until finally the full powers of the battery kicked in, and it started bathing the entire room into a pale, white light. From what I can see around me, I was sitting on a marble floor, an ancient one if I had to guess, cracked and also quite dirty from some sort of membranous matter that had covered it. It was in splotches, growing from the floor onto the walls. It sort of had a weird kind of blackish green tinge to it, like it was old seaweed that had been laid there to rot. I stood up, noticing that around me it stretched everywhere, and in the distance, as I panned my flashlight to the left, I saw a small opening which looked like a doorway covered in this ichor, if you will. I began walking towards it, and I noticed that the membranous matter was growing larger and smaller with every step of mine, as if it was conscious into knowing that I was coming closer. It made a small pathway for me in the areas where it had covered. Soon as I reached the doorway, I stepped over into a threshold, leading over to a vast chasm, with a small bridge lining the way from it to another doorway. As I panned my light over the vast chasm, I noticed that it was no longer made out of marble. It was a jagged, deep-sea-like rock that this room was made out of. There were small bits of barnacle and coral and a gelatinous membranous type growth that grew over it, similar to the black ichor that I saw in the last room, although this one was more iridescent and far less more alive. Looking around, I decided to proceed on the bridge. As I stepped onto the bridge, I noticed it was made out of somewhat of a metallic and coral-like substance. At every step, it slightly cracked and groaned as if it was about to give way, making me plummet into the vast depths beneath me. As I grew closer to the doorway on the other side, I noticed it was slightly illuminated by a crystalline-like structure that was covered in a web of sort of algae and possibly even more barnacles. As soon as I made my way to the doorway beneath the crystalline structure, I peered into the next room. Looking onward into the vast space before me, it was mainly bleak and black, a sort of murky depths that you would only find in an odd place such as this. I stepped over the threshold of the door, and I noticed that all of a sudden lights began to flicker on, and the crystalline structures above me started lighting up, but these were a lot more larger as well as brighter than the previous one that I'd seen before. Also, on further inspection, they weren't covered in any sort of algae or growths like the past one did. They seemed clean, pure. I began walking more, passing the crystalline structures. I noticed that the ceiling above me, in sort of a rectangular large span, was actually a glass-like structure that let me peer out into the ocean above me. It was dark and bleak, just like my hope. I began walking further until I noticed that there was a large statue in the middle of the room. As I grew closer to it, I noticed it was a large heptagram-type structure. After a few minutes of walking, I grew closer to the heptagram-like structure. Looking on it, I saw that it was not made of the previous materials like the marble pillars around me or like the crystalline structures illuminating the room. It was made out of a kind of silver metallic material that would transition in sort of a liquid mercury type material and then to a clear iridescent color, letting me see beneath that layer into a black obsidian core. I looked below me at my feet, and I noticed different colored tiles that had different sort of symbols and hieroglyphs showing different things. For example, one that I saw showed human sacrificing. Another one ended up showing a large city being plummeted into the ocean by some unknown creature. I looked above me, and to where the glass ceiling met was a large spherical glass structure that ended up having multiple symbols on it that glue red like the sun. All of a sudden, I heard a loud crack throughout the room, like a stone breaking in half. I twisted to the left side of the room to which the noise echoed from, and far down the pathway that led to the left side of the room, I noticed that the large stone door started breaking open from the wall. Behind me, I heard another noise that was similar, and it was another door. And then, at the very end of the hallway, adjacent to the one that I had came down from, the other door there was opening as well. My heart began racing, and thoughts started running through my mind of what I should do. All of a sudden, I found myself running towards a pillar from which I had came, in a darkened area. I began sitting there and wait, as I saw tall, pale, white, almost iridescent humanoid creatures walking to the statues. Their face was gaunt and looked like a cross between a human and an anglerfish. Claws protruded from their hands that resembled velociraptor talons, with slight scarring that looked like their skin was peeling. Their arms swing below their knees. They were thin, but looked like pure muscle with reddish-brown splotches, short, thick legs, and also they had long, slender feet that had spiked ends at the end of them. They began walking ever closer to the center, and from every opening of every doorway, more and more began pouring out, walking in a single file line, surrounding the heptagram statue. After all the angler people got to the center of the room, I started hearing screaming and crying, pleads for life, as two larger angler-type people started corralling a group of humans into the center of the room in front of the heptagram statue. They forced them onto their knees whenever a slight rumbling started happening inside the room. Out of nowhere, the black and green ichor that I'd seen before started slowly inking its way out of cracks from the walls, the pillars, and from the floor. Even started pulling out of the doorway at the vast end of the room that I had came through, making a small river in the middle of the room, streaming down to the center. After the river of black and green ichor formed itself at the end of the room, it started making itself into a tall, slender creature with bones protruding out of its blackish-green ichor to form a head. Hissing a guttural and undiscernible language, it shouted over the crowd, hushing the chant. After a few minutes of clicks, hisses, and deep-toned snarls, it disassembled, oozing onto the humans. Screams and the smell of burning and rotting flesh filled the room. I began crying quietly, unknowingly, that I would die here, knowing whatever the hellish place I was in was not an illusion, although I must try and not become the next victim of the deep-sea ichor. My heart started pounding in my chest as I gazed on to the horror in front of me. After it descended on the people, it began spraying blood into the crowd through chutes on its back. The angler people began rejoicing and gasped and made higher-pitched clicks and screams, deafening me. A quiet fell over the crowd, enveloping the room in an eerie silence, besides my head that was pounding loudly from all the screams. So loudly I thought for sure that they'd be able to hear me. After a few moments, the heptagram began to glow red, like a piece of iron or metal inside of a fire. After the statue started glowing more and more bright by the second, the ichor started to stir. It pulled itself into a more and more humanoid form. I, watching on, saw bones and slabs of flesh move and assemble with the liquid ichor, forming a monstrosity that towered above the crowd of its worshippers. Ribs and vertebrae formed in its torso, with sinewy growths of flesh spiderwebbing over its blackish-green body. A group of skulls ripped from the torso, intertwining with a tentacle-like neck, and arms erupted out of the torso, looking like sharpened bones, resembling femurs and humerus bones. Behind me, I heard a sound like rushing water, as more and more of the ichor started ripping out of the marble floor, slowly pouring into the monstrosity in front of me, making it larger and larger. Still silent, the angler people watched on as the monstrosity grew larger and larger, more and more menacing. In all unified chant, all of them uttered in a one word, Alaskatra. It hissed and screamed from multiple mouths of the skulls, slicing the crowd with its large bony arms, ripping off limbs with its mouths, and impaling them with black tentacles. Blood sprayed and body parts flew through the air. Some of the anglers pulled out weapons, shooting it with green plasma beams, only for it to absorb it and retaliate with a barrage of bone shards flying from its body, ripping through their bodies, flaying their skin off their bones, and pulling it into its mass, making it stronger, larger. Soon the combined might of the monster and the firing of plasma made the ceiling, floor, and pillars fracture, breaking the ancient marble and spraying icy ocean water onto me, filling the room. With a snap of a finger, the room exploded, shooting me into a current running past the walls. I floated in the black, numbing water, turning me towards a large, glowing city clinging to the ocean floor, started to be ripped apart by the creature. I could barely think due to the cold water pressure squeezing me. My bones began cracking, and I felt my body on the urge of ripping apart. Then, through the numbing, icy sting, I closed my eyes, and then there was nothing.